Judge Judy had heard unbelievable claims before. She had listened to outrageous excuses, carefully rehearsed lies, and emotional stories that unraveled under the weight of a single question. But even she paused the moment Karen Mitchell calmly leaned forward, pointed toward the toddler sitting quietly beside her, and declared, "My baby can tell the court exactly what happened." The courtroom didn't erupt with laughter. It froze. The bailiff instinctively glanced toward Judge Judy. The plaintiff tightened his grip around a faded manila folder resting on his lap. A woman in the gallery slowly lowered her phone, sensing she was about to witness something no one would ever forget. And Judge Judy did something even more unsettling. She didn't react. She simply looked down for one brief second at a tiny stuffed elephant sitting on the evidence table, a toy that technically wasn't even part of the lawsuit. That silent glance would later become the moment everyone replayed, because the stuffed elephant wasn't just a toy. It was connected to a truth Karen never imagined would surface inside that courtroom. Pay close attention to every detail from this point forward, because this case wasn't really about whether a baby could speak. It wasn't even about the money written on the lawsuit. It was about manipulation, mirror, and the dangerous lengths one person would go to control a story before the truth ever had a chance to speak for itself. Before this story goes any deeper, make sure you're subscribed for more unforgettable courtroom stories like this. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the perfect time. And while you're here, comment below and tell us where you're watching from, because this case is about to take a turn no one inside that courtroom saw coming. The lawsuit looked ordinary on paper. Michael Lawson, a quiet 38-year-old childcare provider, was suing Karen Mitchell for defamation and unpaid childcare expenses after she publicly accused him of frightening her 2-year-old daughter during an afternoon pickup several months earlier. Karen insisted her daughter had witnessed everything. She insisted the little girl had described every detail. She insisted Michael had emotionally traumatized her child. The accusations spread through their neighborhood within days. Parents quietly pulled their children from Michael's licensed home daycare. 5 years of trust disappeared in less than 2 weeks. His income collapsed. Friends stopped calling. Even neighbors who had once waved every morning suddenly crossed the street without looking at him. Sometimes, the smallest accusations carry the heaviest consequences. In court, people often argue over dollars, but what they're really fighting for is dignity. Michael wasn't asking the court to repair his business. He already knew that damage couldn't simply be erased. He wanted anyone, to finally separate rumor from reality. Judge Judy watched him carefully. His clothes were clean but noticeably worn. His hands rested calmly on top of the faded folder, despite the obvious tension in his shoulders. Experienced judges understand something that television cameras rarely capture. People who are inventing pain usually perform it. People carrying real pain often spend enormous energy trying to hide it. Michael never interrupted. He never rolled his eyes. He never whispered while Karen spoke. He simply stared at that stuffed elephant sitting several feet away. That detail did not escape Judge Judy. Bodies confess before mouths do. Karen, on the other hand, appeared almost unusually confident. She smiled politely. She adjusted the expensive bracelet on her wrist. She occasionally looked toward the gallery, as though expecting people to agree with her, before she even answered a question. Confidence is not evidence. Judge Judy had learned that lesson thousands of cases earlier. The judge quietly opened the case file. Only one page, not the entire folder. Just one page. Then she closed it again. The movement lasted barely 2 seconds. Most people never noticed. Karen certainly didn't. But Michael did. His breathing slowed ever so slightly, as though Judge Judy had silently confirmed something without saying a word. The courtroom couldn't possibly understand why that mattered. Not yet. Because hidden beneath ordinary billing records and daycare agreements sat something no one expected to become the heart of the case. Not a contract, not a receipt, not a photograph. something much smaller. Something children often carry without adults paying attention. Truth does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrives stitched into something everyone else dismissed as ordinary. Judge Judy folded her hands together. She allowed the silence to stretch. Silence has its own language inside a courtroom. It pressures honest people to remember. It pressures dishonest people to fill empty space. Karen took the bait. Without being asked another question, she leaned forward confidently and repeated the statement that had already unsettled everyone listening. "My daughter may only be 2, she said, but she told me everything. She can prove Michael's lying." The courtroom shifted almost imperceptibly. Michael lowered his eyes, not because he looked defeated, because he looked exhausted. There is an enormous difference. The narrator could almost feel the emotional current changing direction. This case had stopped being about unpaid invoices. It had become something far more dangerous. When someone cannot defeat the facts, they often try to replace them with a story impossible to challenge. After all, who would question the words supposedly spoken by a child too young to testify? Karen seemed absolutely certain no one could. What she failed to notice was that Judge Judy hadn't looked at her once during that entire speech. Instead, the judge quietly reached for the faded folder Michael had brought into court. Then, without revealing what she had found inside, she asked the bailiff to place the small stuffed elephant beside it. The courtroom fell into complete silence, because somehow, those two ordinary objects appeared to belong together. The courtroom remained so quiet that even the soft scrape of the bailiff placing the stuffed elephant beside Michael Lawson's worn folder seemed unusually loud. Karen noticed the movement. She smiled. From where she sat, it looked harmless. Another toy, another distraction, another opportunity to repeat the emotional story that had already convinced neighbors, parents, and friends that Michael was dangerous. But Judge Judy never treated small objects as meaningless. Experience had taught her that people carefully choose what they protect. Sometimes that was money. Sometimes it was reputation, and sometimes it was something as ordinary as a child's favorite toy. She rested one hand on the bench and looked toward Michael for the first time since the hearing had begun. He didn't rush to speak. He didn't plead. He didn't dramatically defend himself. Instead, he carefully slid the faded folder closer, almost as though he had spent months waiting for someone willing to open it. That small movement told its own story. Real pain often arrives organized. People who have lived through disbelief learn to keep every receipt, every note, every forgotten detail, because they know one day someone may finally ask them to prove they weren't imagining what happened. Judge Judy noticed the corners of the folder had been repaired with clear tape. The papers inside were arranged with handwritten tabs, nothing expensive, nothing flashy. Just careful preparation by someone who understood that dignity sometimes survives inside paperwork when everything else has been taken away. To understand why that mattered, you first have to understand who Michael Lawson really was. For nearly 6 years, he had operated a licensed home daycare in a quiet suburban neighborhood outside Chicago. Parents trusted him. Teachers recommended him. Children ran toward his front door every morning carrying backpacks almost bigger than they were. His home wasn't luxurious. It didn't have expensive playground equipment or brightly colored advertisements. What it had was consistency. DeCrentz often joked that Michael remembered every child's favorite snack, every allergy, every bedtime routine, and every comfort toy, especially comfort toys. That tiny detail would become impossible to ignore. Michael had never married. Several years earlier, he had lost his younger sister Emily to an aggressive illness that progressed faster than anyone expected. Before she died, Emily had asked him to keep helping children. She believed he had a rare gift. Not because he entertained them, because he listened to them. She once told him something he never forgot. Children don't always tell adults the truth with words. Sometimes they tell it with what they refuse to let go. Those words stayed with him long after the funeral. In the courtroom, they echoed silently every time he looked at the stuffed elephant. The narrator couldn't help noticing something else. Michael never once referred to Karen's daughter by name with anger. Whenever Judge Judy mentioned the little girl, his expression softened. That mattered. People motivated by revenge usually stop seeing children as separate from adult conflict. Michael never made that mistake. He repeatedly insisted that the child herself was never the problem, someone else was. Judge Judy noticed that distinction immediately. Compassion is difficult to fake under pressure. Meanwhile, Karen remained perfectly composed. She occasionally whispered to her attorney. She nodded confidently whenever the judge glanced toward her side of the courtroom. Her posture suggested absolute certainty. She behaved like someone who believed the emotional weight of involving a child guaranteed victory before evidence even entered the conversation. Experienced judges recognize another pattern. When someone relies too heavily on emotion before facts appear, they're often hoping emotion will replace facts altogether. Judge Judy leaned forward. "Mr. Lawson," she said calmly, "tell me what happened the afternoon this lawsuit began." The courtroom shifted again. Michael took a slow breath, not because he was rehearsing, because memory sometimes hurts more than accusation. "It was pickup time," he began quietly. Karen arrived about 20 minutes late. His voice remained steady. There had been a thunderstorm earlier that day. The little girl had become frightened by the loud thunder. Like many toddlers, she sought comfort. She grabbed her stuffed elephant and refused to let go. Michael explained that he had simply knelt beside her, reassured her that the storm had passed, and waited until she stopped crying before helping her put on her shoes. Nothing unusual, nothing dramatic. Exactly the kind of moment that happened almost daily in childcare. Karen interrupted immediately. "That's not what my daughter told me. Judge Judy didn't even look up. You'll have your turn." Silence returned, Michael continued. When Karen arrived, her daughter didn't want to leave yet. She wanted 5 more minutes to finish coloring. He hesitated for just a moment, not dramatically, carefully. Karen became frustrated. According to Michael, Karen reached for the child before she was ready. The little girl began crying again. Still clutching the elephant, Karen allegedly blamed Michael before she even walked out the front door. By that evening, neighborhood social media groups were already discussing allegations that Michael had frightened a child. Within 48 hours, cancellations began. Doc Krentz didn't ask questions. They simply left. The narrator understood why this part of the story felt heavier than the paperwork suggested. This wasn't merely a dispute over unpaid childcare fees. This was what happens when trust disappears faster than truth. Trust takes years to build. Rumors sometimes need only minutes. Judge Judy quietly tapped a pencil against the bench, not impatiently, thoughtfully. Then she asked one simple question. "Did anyone else witness the pickup?" Michael looked toward the folder. Yes. Karen smiled again, almost too quickly. That smile caught Judge Judy's attention. Liars often celebrate before the game is over. Honest people usually wait. Michael slowly reached into the folder, not for a receipt, not for a contract, but for something sealed inside a plain white envelope that had never been mentioned in the lawsuit. Judge Judy watched every movement without interrupting. Karen's confident expression didn't change. She still believed the strongest witness in the courtroom was a 2-year-old child. She had no idea another witness had been silently waiting for months, and that witness had seen everything. Karen Mitchell entered the courtroom that morning believing she had already won. Not because the evidence favored her, not because the law clearly stood on her side, but because she had spent months watching people accept her version of events without asking a single difficult question. Judge Judy had seen that kind of confidence before. It was the confidence of someone who mistook public sympathy for proof. The narrator could see it in the way Karen sat. Her shoulders remained relaxed. Her answers came quickly. She rarely paused to think. People telling the truth often revisit memories before they speak. People protecting a story usually revisit the version they have practiced. The difference is subtle. Experienced judges notice it anyway. Karen had built a reputation in her neighborhood as the outspoken parent who always fought for her daughter. She organized school fundraisers. She managed online parent groups. She was the first to comment whenever another family shared a complaint. Most people admired that confidence. Very few questioned whether confidence and accuracy were the same thing. According to several parents who had submitted written statements, Karen's opinions often became the neighborhood's opinions. If she distrusted someone, others quietly followed. If she praised a business, customers appeared. If she criticized one, they disappeared. Influence is a powerful thing. In the wrong hands, it can become something much darker. Michael learned that lesson faster than anyone should. Within days of Karen's accusations, his voicemail filled with cancellations. Doc Kuntz, who had hugged him only a week earlier, suddenly refused to return his calls. One family even mailed back an unused daycare key without including a note. The silence hurt more than angry words ever could. Sometimes rejection arrives in an empty envelope. Judge Judy glanced toward Karen. She wasn't watching Michael while he spoke. She was watching the gallery. Every few moments, she searched the faces behind her as though expecting silent agreement. That detail mattered. People who rely on appearances often keep checking whether the audience is still applauding. Truth rarely needs an audience. Karen finally leaned toward the microphone. He wants everyone to feel sorry for him. Her tone remained calm. He lost clients because parents believed their own children, not because of anything I said. She folded her arms with quiet satisfaction. And honestly, Judge, he's always been overly emotional. The courtroom grew still. That sentence sounded harmless on the surface, but Judge Judy recognized exactly what it was. It wasn't a defense. It was an attempt to redefine the person standing across from her. When someone cannot erase the facts, they often try to erase the credibility of the person presenting them. The narrator noticed Michael's reaction. He didn't interrupt. He didn't shake his head. He simply looked down for a moment before slowly lifting his eyes again. That kind of restraint isn't weakness, it's exhaustion. Judge Judy rested her pen on the bench. Mr. Lawson has had an opportunity to speak without interruption. Her voice never rose. You'll extend him the same courtesy, Karen forced a polite smile. Of course. But the smiles disappeared almost as quickly as it arrived. Real authority doesn't need to compete. It simply waits. The courtroom seemed to breathe again. Judge Judy turned back toward Michael. You said another witness saw the pickup. Yes, Your Honor. Who? Michael looked toward the plain white envelope resting beside the faded folder. My next-door neighbor. Karen laughed, not loudly. Just enough for everyone to hear. Oh, that's perfect. She leaned back confidently. The same neighbor who's been friends with Michael for years? She shook her head before anyone answered. That's not a witness. That's loyalty pretending to be evidence. Several people in the gallery exchanged nervous glances. The narrator understood why. Karen wasn't just dismissing testimony. She was planting doubt before anyone heard it. Psychologically, it was a familiar strategy. Discredit the messenger before the message arrives. Judge Judy had watched it happen thousands of times. She remained perfectly still. Bodies confess before mouths do. Karen had begun tapping her fingers against the table. Only lightly. Only for a second. But it was the first crack in her composure. Meanwhile, Michael carefully removed a folded sheet of paper from the envelope. Then another. Neither was what Karen expected. There were no emotional letters, no dramatic accusations, no photographs, just signed statements. Simple, organized, specific. Judge Judy accepted them without comment. She scanned only the first few lines before placing them neatly beside the stuffed elephant. Agan. She didn't reveal what she had read. Timing matters inside a courtroom. The gallery leaned forward almost in unison. Karen tried to read the judge's expression. She found nothing. Calm can become the strongest form of pressure. The narrator noticed something else. For the first time since the hearing began, Karen looked directly at the stuffed elephant only for a heartbeat. Then she looked away. It was almost invisible. But Judge Judy saw it. Experienced judges don't just watch where people look. They notice what people avoid. She made a quiet note on the pad in front of her. Karen cleared her throat. "I don't understand why that toy keeps sitting there," Judge Judy answered without emotion. "Sometimes the smallest exhibit explains the largest lie." The words settled over the courtroom like a heavy curtain. Michael slowly exhaled. Karen forced another smile. But this one didn't reach her eyes. She still believed she controlled the story. She still believed that repeating the words "my daughter said" would outweigh everything else waiting inside that folder. Then, convinced she was untouchable, she looked directly at Michael with unmistakable contempt. Her voice echoed through the silent courtroom. "Nobody is going to believe a lonely babysitter over a mother protecting her own child." The second those words left her mouth, something changed, not in Michael, not in the gallery. In Judge Judy, she quietly folded her hands together. She didn't interrupt. She didn't argue. She simply looked at Karen for several long seconds. The silence became almost unbearable because everyone in that courtroom sensed the same thing. Karen had just made a mistake she couldn't take back. Karen's words lingered in the courtroom long after she stopped speaking. Nobody is going to believe a lonely babysitter over a mother protecting her own child. No one moved. Even the gallery seemed to understand that something irreversible had just happened. Judge Judy had heard insults before. She had watched defendants mock plaintiffs, ridicule witnesses, and even challenge the authority of the court itself. But this was different. Karen hadn't simply defended herself. She had built her entire case on the assumption that motherhood automatically made her version of events untouchable. Judge Judy let the silence settle. Experienced judges understand that silence has weight. The innocent often grow uncomfortable because they fear being misunderstood. The dishonest grow uncomfortable because they fear what comes next. Karen shifted in her chair, only slightly. But it was the first time she looked anything less than completely certain. The narrator could almost feel the atmosphere changing. This was the point where the case stopped revolving around accusations. It became a test of credibility. Judge Judy finally spoke. "Mrs. Mitchell," her voice was calm enough to make everyone lean forward. "You've repeated several times that your daughter told you exactly what happened." Karen nodded immediately. "Yes, you've based your public accusations on those conversations." "Absolutely. You've told neighbors, parents, and this court that her words were your proof." Karen answered without hesitation. "That's right." Judge Judy gave the smallest nod. Then she asked one question, a question so simple that it almost sounded ordinary. "Tell me the exact first sentence your daughter spoke when she got into your car." Karen blinked. For the first time all morning, she didn't answer immediately. "Well," she glanced toward her attorney. She said he scared her. Judge Judy didn't write anything. She didn't react. She simply asked another question. "Those were her exact words?" Karen hesitated. "I mean, that's what she meant." Judge Judy looked up. "What were her exact words?" The courtroom seemed to stop breathing. Karen swallowed. She was crying. "That wasn't my question." Another pause, longer this time. "I don't remember every word." The narrator noticed Michael lower his eyes. Not in triumph, but in quiet relief. Judge Judy had not accused Karen of lying. She had simply asked her to stand on the foundation she claimed already existed. And that foundation was beginning to crack. Lawyers often rehearse conclusions. They forget to rehearse details. Karen tried to recover. "Judge, she's only 2 years old. Children don't always speak clearly." Judge Judy nodded once. Karen smiled, believing the judge had finally understood. But Judge Judy wasn't finished. which is precisely why adults must be extraordinarily careful before claiming certainty about what a toddler intended. The smile disappeared. The gallery exchanged uneasy glances. The psychological balance had shifted. Karen was no longer explaining events. She was defending assumptions. Judge Judy slowly reached toward the faded folder, not the envelope. The folder itself. Michael watched without speaking. The stuffed elephant remained beside it, untouched. The narrator couldn't help but notice that Karen's eyes briefly returned to the toy. Agin, just for a fraction of a second, Judge Judy noticed it too. People rarely fear objects. They fear what those objects represent. Before we discover what Judge Judy was about to reveal, comment below with one word. Justice. If you believe the truth always matters more than confidence. And while you're thinking about this case, ask yourself one question. Why would an ordinary stuffed elephant keep drawing everyone's attention? Judge Judy carefully opened the folder. Inside were neatly organized daycare attendance logs, pickup records, emergency contact forms, routine incident notes. Nothing dramatic, nothing explosive, at least not yet. She turned several pages before stopping at one document. This is your daily transition log? Michael nodded. Yes, Your Honor. Every child has one. Karen laughed softly. A notebook? That's your big evidence? Judge Judy didn't acknowledge the interruption. Instead, she read silently, every child who attended Michael's daycare had a brief daily record, nap times, meals, minor injuries, mood changes, pickup observations. Simple notes written to help parents understand their children's day. Routine, professional, consistent. Judge Judy flipped backward, then forward, then backward again. Porous matter. One isolated page proves very little. Months of consistent records often tell a different story. She stopped at the page dated the afternoon of the alleged incident. Michael had written only 3 short observations. Thunderstorm frightened child. Comforted with favorite elephant. Child reluctant to leave activity during pickup. No accusations, no complaints, no emotional language. Just facts recorded before anyone knew there would ever be a lawsuit. Judge Judy placed the page flat on the bench. Then she looked directly at Karen. Did you receive a copy of this log that afternoon? Karen shifted again. I don't remember, Michael quietly answered. She signed for it. Judge Judy turned another page. Attached neatly behind the log was a parent acknowledgement form, signed, dated. Karen Mitchell, the courtroom fell silent once more. Karen leaned forward. That doesn't prove anything. Judge Judy remained calm. No. She rested one finger on the document. It proves something much more important. Karen frowned. What? Judge Judy closed the folder halfway. Then, without revealing the final piece of evidence hidden beneath the attendance logs, she looked toward the bailiff. Would you please bring the monitor closer? The gallery straightened. Michael slowly closed his eyes. Karen's attorney suddenly stopped writing. Because everyone understood exactly what that request usually meant. Paper had created doubt. The next piece of evidence had the power to create certainty. And whatever Judge Judy was about to place on that screen had been hidden inside the folder all along. No one in the courtroom spoke. The recording had ended, but its silence seemed louder than the voices that had filled the room only minutes earlier. Karen Mitchell stared at the stuffed elephant as though it had betrayed her. It hadn't. It had simply remembered. Judge Judy remained perfectly still for several seconds. She didn't rush toward a verdict. She didn't need dramatic words. The evidence had already done what emotion never could. The narrator could almost feel the entire courtroom processing the same realization at once. This case had never truly been about a talking baby. It had been about an adult placing words into a child's mouth until those words became accepted as truth. Sometimes the greatest manipulation isn't teaching someone what to say. It's convincing everyone else they already said it. Judge Judy finally looked directly at Karen. Her expression remained calm. Disappointment carried far more weight than anger. Mrs. Mitchell, she began, your daughter did exactly what 2-year-olds often do. Karen lowered her eyes. She sought comfort during a thunderstorm. Judge Judy paused. The problem began when you decided to rewrite that memory. Karen opened her mouth. I was only trying to protect. Judge Judy gently raised one hand. No. The courtroom became silent again. You were protecting a story. Karen's attorney slowly sat back down. He understood there was nothing left to argue. Judge Judy picked up the signed daycare log one final time. This document shows what happened before there was a lawsuit. She placed it beside the security video transcript. This recording shows what happened before anyone had time to create a narrative. Finally, she rested one hand on the stuffed elephant, and this toy preserved what no adult could honestly dispute. Truth had arrived from 3 different directions. Each piece supported the next. The proof ladder was complete. First came the written record. Then the video, finally, the voice preserved inside the one object everyone underestimated. The narrator watched Michael carefully. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't celebrating. His eyes had filled with tears he had spent months refusing to shed, not because he wanted Karen punished, because someone had finally believed him. Judge Judy turned toward him. Mr. Lawson. Yes, Your Honor. The court finds that Miss Mitchell knowingly repeated accusations she could not truthfully verify, resulting in measurable damage to your business and reputation. Karen quietly covered her face. Judge Judy continued. Judgment is entered for the plaintiff. She awarded Michael the unpaid childcare fees, compensation for proven financial losses within the limits of the court, and court costs. Then she added something unexpected. The court further recommends that the authenticated recordings and supporting documentation be preserved should any additional civil proceedings become necessary. Karen's attorney closed his file. There would be no dramatic objection. There was nothing left to challenge. Then came the sentence that would be quoted by everyone who watched the hearing. Judge Judy looked directly at Karen and said, Asterisk, when adults borrow a child's innocence to support deception, they don't protect children. They betray them completely. No one interrupted. No one applauded. Some moments deserve silence. Michael slowly picked up the stuffed elephant. He held it gently before placing it back into an evidence bag. He didn't look at it as proof. He looked at it as a reminder. The little girl had never been his enemy. She had been the only truly honest witness from the very beginning. The narrator noticed Karen watching the evidence technician seal the toy. For the first time that day, she seemed to understand that the object she had dismissed as meaningless had quietly carried the truth all along. Within 24 hours of the hearing, several parents who had withdrawn their children contacted Michael personally. Some apologized. Others admitted they had reacted too quickly. A few asked whether he would consider reopening enrollment. Within 48 hours, neighborhood social media pages that had once shared Karen's accusations began posting corrections. Not everyone admitted they had been wrong, but enough people did. Sometimes justice begins with a verdict. Healing begins with acknowledgement. By the 72-hour mark, Michael's licensing agency completed its review using the same evidence presented in court. His record remained spotless. The complaint against him was formally closed. It didn't erase every painful memory. It couldn't restore every lost client. But it restored something even more important: his name. The narrator reflected on the image that would remain with everyone who had witnessed the case. It wasn't the security video. It wasn't the courtroom exchange. It wasn't even Karen's collapsing confidence. It was a small stuffed elephant sitting quietly on the evidence table. An ordinary toy, ignored by nearly everyone, until it became the voice of the truth. Judge Judy had understood something from the very beginning. Evidence doesn't have to be loud to be powerful. Sometimes it arrives stitched into fabric, hidden inside routine, waiting patiently until someone finally asks the right question. This fictional courtroom story reminds us that reputations can be damaged in a single afternoon, but rebuilding trust takes far longer. Real justice depends on evidence, careful judgment, and the willingness to question even the stories that seem emotionally convincing at first. If this story reminded you that truth deserves patience and evidence deserves respect, make sure to like this video. Subscribe for more unforgettable courtroom stories, and share it with someone who believes justice should always be guided by facts, not assumptions, and tell us in the comments. What moment changed your mind the most during this case? Your script successfully completed.